When Rebecca Wanja received a "Please call me" SMS from an unknown number at 4 p.m. on June 23, 2016, she didn't think much of it. Like many Kenyans, she was accustomed to receiving such messages and had grown wary of them. In a time when phone scams were rampant, it was common to ignore unsolicited communication from unfamiliar numbers. A little later, the same number called her twice, but Rebecca let the calls go unanswered. Her instincts told her it was probably just another scammer trying to trick her, and she wasn't about to fall for it. She had heard too many stories of people being swindled by smooth-talking strangers, so she chose to err on the side of caution. Little did she know that ignoring those calls would cost her. A mistake that altered her life forever. Welcome to Twisted Tales on our weekly series where we tell crime stories from Kenya and beyond. If this is your type of thing, don't forget to like and subscribe to ensure you don't miss out on our latest uploads. Rebecca had no idea that the unknown caller was connected to a dire situation involving her husband. Her husband, along with his lawyer and driver, had been trapped inside a container at Syokimau Police Post. They were victims of a rogue cop, Frederick, who had detained them illegally. Frederick had orchestrated a sinister plan. Instead of following proper procedure and booking them into the occurrence book, OB, as required, he had kept them in the container, effectively hiding their detention from official records. This deliberate act of unlawfulness was part of a larger, more malevolent scheme that was about to unfold. While Rebecca dismissed the calls as potential scams, her husband's situation was becoming increasingly desperate. Inside the container, the three men were confined in cramped and uncomfortable conditions, unaware of how the situation would resolve or whether anyone outside knew about their predicament. Rebecca Wanja was the devoted wife of Josephat, a boda operator working in the small town of Syokimau. Josephat's life had not been easy. He had dropped out of Rompo Secondary School in Form 2 due to financial constraints, having lost his parents at a young age. As an orphan, he faced numerous challenges, but he worked tirelessly to make a living and support his family. Despite his limited formal education, Josephat was known in the community for his resilience and hard work. His boda business was a lifeline for many in his area, offering transport and earning him respect among his peers. His struggles and achievements were well known to those around him, including Rebecca, who stood by his side through thick and thin. Unbeknownst to Rebecca, Josephat's dedication to his work and his straightforward life were about to intersect with a dangerous situation orchestrated by a corrupt police officer. Her husband, along with his lawyer and driver, was entangled in a dark scheme, hidden away in a container, and it was Rebecca's role to navigate this crisis while being unaware of the full extent of the danger her husband. Josephat Mwendwa, originally from Marimanti in Tharaka Nithi, had moved to town in search of better opportunities. His rural upbringing had been marked by hardship, especially after the loss of his parents. Determined to improve his circumstances, he relocated to the bustling town, hoping for a fresh start. His uncle played a pivotal role in this transition. Recognizing Josephat's potential and the challenges he faced, his uncle provided crucial support. Not only did he fund a short vocational course that equipped Josephat with new skills, but he also gifted him a motorcycle. This gesture was more than just a means of transport. It was the key to Josephat's new livelihood. With the motorcycle, Josephat launched his boda business in his area town, which became his main source of income. The combination of the training he received and the motorcycle allowed him to establish himself in the community, earning a living and contributing to the local economy. His uncle's support had set the foundation for Josephat's new life, but it was also this very transition that would lead him into unforeseen danger. Josephat, a young and hard-working man, seized the opportunity in the town with determination. The motorcycle his uncle had gifted him became his ticket to a new life. Eager to make the most of this chance, Josephat dove into his business with enthusiasm. He spent his days navigating the bustling streets of the town, always on the lookout for customers. Like many of his peers, he positioned himself strategically along busy roads, ready to offer rides to anyone in need. His routine involved waiting in high-traffic areas, where he could quickly respond to requests for transport. The energy of the growing town was palpable, and Josephat immersed himself in the hustle and bustle, building a reputation for reliability and hard work. His dedication paid off as he gradually established a steady stream of customers. The job was demanding, with long hours and the constant need to stay alert, but Josephat's perseverance shone through. He became a familiar face in the town, known for his punctuality and friendly service, while working tirelessly to secure a better future for himself and his family. During one of his daily routines, as Josephat Menda navigated the lively streets of the town, he crossed paths with Rebecca Wanja. Rebecca was immediately struck by Josephat's dedication and hard work. His commitment to his boda business and his earnest efforts to carve out a better life for himself were evident, and they left a lasting impression on her. Rebecca, drawn to his determination and charm, found herself increasingly captivated by Josephat. Their connection grew stronger with each passing day, and what began as a chance encounter soon blossomed into a deep relationship. Their shared values and mutual respect forged a strong bond between them. As their relationship deepened, Rebecca and Josephat decided to take their commitment to the next level. They chose to enter a come-we-stay arrangement, a common practice in Kenya where couples live together and build their lives without a formal marriage ceremony. This arrangement reflected their strong partnership and their desire to build a future together. With a family now depending on him, Josephat Menda poured even more effort into his work. He was driven by a desire to provide a better life for his loved ones, something he had lacked during his own childhood. Every morning, he rose with determination, ready to face the day's challenges and earn an honest living. He worked tirelessly, often starting early and finishing late, all the while navigating the busy streets of the town. His commitment was unwavering, fueled by the hope of creating a stable and fulfilling life for Rebecca and their child. The sacrifices he made were part of his larger goal, to ensure that his family would have opportunities and comforts that had been out of reach for him growing up. Josephat's dedication to his work was evident in his approach to each day. He greeted every job with the same enthusiasm and diligence, determined to build a future where his family could thrive. His efforts reflected his deep commitment to changing the narrative of his own life and ensuring that his loved ones enjoyed the security and happiness he had always wished for. As Josephat Menda rose each morning with a resolve to build a better future for his family, another man was beginning his day with a very different agenda. Frederick, the officer in charge at Syokimo Police Post, had been entrusted with the responsibility of protecting the public. Yet, his actions were anything but protective. Frederick, instead of upholding the law and ensuring safety, was exploiting his position of authority to instill fear and commit grave injustices. His role as a police officer was meant to be one of service and integrity, but he was using his power to manipulate and terrorize the very people he was sworn to protect. His misconduct and corruption were not just isolated incidents. They were part of a broader pattern of abuse that undermined trust in law enforcement. The contrast between Frederick's malevolent actions and the genuine efforts of individuals like Josephat highlighted the deep-seated issues within the system. While Josephat worked tirelessly to create a stable life for his family, Frederick's actions threatened to unravel the safety and security that citizens like Josephat relied upon. As Frederick's sinister plans unfolded, his betrayal of his duty posed a significant threat to the community, making his role as a protector a disturbing irony. On April 10, 2015, as Josephat Menda went about his daily routine, he was approached by a man in plain clothes. This man, later revealed to be Frederick, began to harass Josephat with unfounded accusations. The claims were frivolous and baseless, but Frederick's aggressive demeanor suggested otherwise. Josephat, known for his honesty and integrity, immediately denied the accusations. His attempts to defend himself only seemed to escalate the situation. What started as a simple interaction quickly turned into a heated argument. Frederick, abusing his position and authority, was relentless. His aggressive approach was designed to intimidate and coerce, rather than to seek the truth. The confrontation grew more intense, with Frederick's frustration becoming evident. Josephat, bewildered and frustrated, found himself in a confrontation with a man who was supposed to be upholding the law, not using it as a weapon against him. This unexpected and unjust encounter marked the beginning of a troubling ordeal that would soon escalate further, unraveling the safety and trust that Josephat had in the system meant to protect him. In a shocking escalation of violence, Frederick suddenly pulled out his gun and, without warning, fired a shot at Josephat Menda. The bullet struck Josephat in his arm, leaving him bloodied and in excruciating pain. The senselessness of the act was evident, as Frederick's actions were not justifiable and demonstrated a complete abuse of his authority. In a panic over the immediate and severe consequences of his actions, Frederick's initial aggression gave way to a desperate attempt to mitigate the damage. He rushed Josephat to the hospital, driven by fear and the urgent need to cover up his brutal misconduct. The journey to the hospital was fraught with tension, as Frederick grappled with the reality of what he had done and the implications it could have on his career and reputation. At the hospital, Josephat received medical treatment for his gunshot wound. The severity of his injury required immediate attention, and he faced not only the physical pain of the wound, but also the emotional trauma of the unjust attack. Meanwhile, Frederick's actions were casting a dark shadow over the trust and safety within the community, highlighting the profound failure of those entrusted with protecting the public. After the shocking shooting, Frederick quickly realized that the situation was spiraling out of control. The attack had occurred in broad daylight, and there were numerous witnesses who could attest to the violence he had inflicted. Fearing the inevitable backlash and the growing evidence against him, Frederick made a calculated decision to shift the narrative in his favor. To protect himself, Frederick arrested Josephat Menda, despite him still writhing in pain from the gunshot wound. Using his position and the privilege afforded to him as a police officer, Frederick filed false criminal charges against Josephat. The fabricated charges were designed to portray Josephat as the aggressor, thus diverting attention from the brutality he had inflicted. Frederick's actions were a clear abuse of power, leveraging his position to manipulate the legal system and escape accountability. Josephat, already suffering from the physical and emotional trauma of being shot, now faced a legal battle against fabricated accusations. This further compounded his suffering and highlighted the deep corruption and misuse of authority within the police force. The betrayal Josephat Menda experienced was profound. Facing the shock of being wrongfully charged with serious offenses, possession of narcotic drugs, gambling in a public place, and resisting arrest, Josephat was left bewildered and distressed. These charges were fabricated by Frederick to divert attention from the unjust shooting and to secure Frederick's position. Forced into a legal struggle at Mavoko Law Court under the case number 2020 of 2015, Josephat knew he needed help to combat the false accusations. Desperate for justice, he turned to the Independent Policing Oversight Authority, IPOA, a body responsible for addressing complaints against police officers. Recognizing the gravity and sensitivity of the situation, IPOA acted swiftly. Upon receiving Josephat's complaint, IPOA launched an investigation into the allegations against Frederick. The process involved thorough interrogations of Frederick and a detailed examination of the evidence surrounding the case. Frederick, already under scrutiny, was not pleased with the turn of events. His discomfort was evident as he faced the possibility of accountability for his actions. IPOA's intervention was critical in exposing the corruption and abuse of power that had marred Josephat's life. Their investigation aimed to uncover the truth and hold Frederick accountable, offering Josephat a chance at justice and a resolution to the wrongful charges he faced. On December 13, 2015, With the Independent Policing Oversight Authority, IPOA, closing in and the pressure mounting, Frederick decided to take drastic measures to protect himself. In the dead of night, at around 3 a.m., he used his position as a police officer to carry out a covert and unlawful operation. Frederick, determined to escape accountability, orchestrated the abduction of Josephat Menda from his home. The early hour was chosen to minimize the chances of witnesses and to catch Josephat off guard. Frederick's goal was clear: to intimidate Josephat into withdrawing the charges he had filed with IPOA. The ongoing investigation threatened Frederick's career, with the possibility of dismissal looming large. The abduction was not just an act of intimidation, but a clear abuse of the power and authority Frederick wielded as a police officer. Josephat, who had already suffered from the false charges and the trauma of being shot, was now facing a new level of fear and coercion. Frederick's actions were a desperate attempt to silence Josephat and undermine the pursuit of justice, showing the lengths he was willing to go to protect his corrupt actions from being exposed. As they made their way to the police station, the situation grew increasingly tense. Frederick, seething with desperation and anger, turned to Josephat Menda and delivered a chilling threat. With cold resolve, Frederick told Josephat that he would finish what he had started. The implication was clear. Frederick intended to silence Josephat permanently, to kill him and erase any chance of the truth coming to light. To Frederick, Josephat was just a small man, someone insignificant enough to be disposed of without consequence. But Josephat was no ordinary man. Despite the terror he faced, his spirit remained unbroken. His resilience, like that of a soldier in battle, allowed him to stand firm in the face of Frederick's intimidation. He refused to comply with the demands to withdraw his complaint, knowing that doing so would mean surrendering to corruption and injustice. Josephat's refusal to be cowed by Frederick's threats was an act of incredible bravery. It was this resilience that would ultimately keep him alive and push the fight for justice forward, even as he faced one of the darkest moments of his life. In another attempt to crush Josephat Menda's resolve and force him into submission, Frederick resorted to fabricating yet another set of charges. This time, he used the Traffic Act as a weapon against Josephat, piling on a series of baseless accusations in a bid to further intimidate and manipulate him. Frederick booked Josephat under 6 separate counts, accusing him of riding a motorcycle without a license, lacking insurance, failing to wear a helmet, not donning a reflector jacket, and carrying excess and uninsured passengers. Each of these charges was designed to put pressure on Josephat, making it increasingly difficult for him to maintain his innocence and continue his fight for justice. The new charges were a clear abuse of Frederick's authority, intended to overwhelm Josephat with legal troubles and force him into compliance. By leveraging the full weight of the law in such a corrupt manner, Frederick hoped to break Josephat's spirit and coerce him into withdrawing the complaint with IPOA. However, Josephat, who had already endured so much, continued to stand firm, refusing to be bullied into submission. His determination to fight back against the unjust system that Frederick represented only grew stronger, even as the corrupt officer's efforts to silence him became more ruthless. Despite the new charges, Josephat Menda knew he had the truth on his side. The irony of the situation was glaring. How could he be accused of riding a motorcycle when he was still recuperating from a gunshot wound inflicted by Frederick himself? The very idea was absurd, and Josephat saw this as an opportunity to expose Frederick's lies in court. With this knowledge, Josephat decided to take the charges head-on, confident that they would unravel under scrutiny. He knew that the accusations were not just baseless but also easily disproven. The physical evidence of his injury was undeniable, and it directly contradicted the claims made by Frederick. Josephat took the charges and prepared to face them in court, hopeful that the Independent Policing Oversight Authority, IPOA, would step in soon. The mounting legal battles and the constant pressure from Frederick were exhausting, but Josephat remained resolute. He trusted that justice would prevail and that IPOA would help bring the truth to light, exposing the corruption and abuse of power that had plagued his life. As he awaited the court date, Josephat held on to the belief that his ordeal would eventually lead to accountability for Frederick, and that his fight would not be in vain. Despite Josephat Mwenda's hope that justice would eventually prevail, the reality of the Kenyan legal system began to take its toll. The delays were relentless, and the process dragged on for months. Josephat, determined to clear his name, attended every court hearing, holding on to the belief that the truth would eventually set him free. But on February 16, 2016, Josephat's faith in the system and in the Independent Policing Oversight Authority, IPOA, was dealt a crushing blow. On that day, he was arrested yet again, this time under the accusation of robbery. The arrest was another clear attempt by Frederick to silence and intimidate him, to wear him down until he had no fight left. Josephat was taken back to Mlolongo police station, the very place where his nightmare had begun. The weight of the false accusations, the constant harassment, and the repeated abuse of power by Frederick made this latest arrest almost unbearable. It seemed that every step forward was met with another unjust setback. However, in a rare moment of relief, no charges were ultimately filed against him. Despite the arrest, Josephat was not formally charged with robbery, leaving him temporarily free from yet another legal battle. But the damage was already done. His faith in IPOA and the justice system had been severely shaken. The relentless persecution he faced left him questioning whether justice would ever truly be served in his case. This latest incident only deepened Josephat's resolve to keep fighting, even as the odds seemed increasingly stacked against him. His journey was far from over, and the road to justice remained long and uncertain. The relentless harassment and injustice that Josephat Mwenda faced left him with no choice but to seek help from a higher authority. Realizing that the local systems had failed him repeatedly, Josephat turned to the International Justice Mission, IJM, an organization known for its commitment to protecting the rights of the vulnerable and holding the powerful accountable. At IJM, Josephat found a glimmer of hope. He recounted the series of tragic and unjust events he had endured, being shot, falsely charged, and repeatedly harassed by Frederick. The gravity of his situation was undeniable, and IJM recognized the urgency of his case. Without hesitation, they connected Josephat with their top lawyer, Willie Kimani. Willie Kimani was not just any lawyer. He was a seasoned advocate with a deep passion for justice and a reputation for taking on cases where the odds seemed insurmountable. Kimani listened intently to Josephat's story, understanding the full extent of the corruption and abuse that had turned his life upside down. He was determined to see that justice was served, not only for Josephat, but also to challenge the system that allowed such injustices to occur. With Willie Kimani now on his side, Josephat felt a renewed sense of hope. The battle was far from over, but with the support of IJM and Kimani's legal expertise, Josephat was no longer fighting alone. The next steps would be crucial in his pursuit of justice, and with IJM's backing, there was finally a real chance to hold those responsible for his suffering accountable. Willie Kimani was more than just a lawyer. He was a formidable human rights advocate and activist with a deep commitment to justice. His resolve had been shaped by years of confronting the darkest sides of the legal system, representing individuals who had faced severe injustices at the hands of those in power. One of Willie Kimani's most notable cases was his representation of Njuguna, the former spokesman for the Mungiki. Njuguna, who had renounced his ties to the controversial group, was nonetheless targeted and killed in broad daylight by police officers. This case, which highlighted the extrajudicial killings and brutality within the police force, had a profound impact on Kimani. It reinforced his determination to stand up for those who had been wronged by the very institutions meant to protect them. Willie Kimani had been admitted as an advocate of the High Court of Kenya in 2011, and since then, he had dedicated his career to defending the rights of the marginalized and oppressed. His reputation as a fearless defender of justice made him the perfect ally for Josephat, who had been caught in a web of corruption and abuse. Kimani's experience with cases like Njuguna's meant he was well acquainted with the dangers and challenges that came with taking on the police. Yet, this only strengthened his resolve. He understood the risks involved, but his commitment to his clients and to the broader fight for human rights in Kenya was unwavering. With Kimani on board, Josephat's case gained a powerful advocate who was ready to take on the system, no matter the cost. Willie Kimani's journey into the realm of human rights advocacy had been marked by a deep sense of purpose and a relentless drive to stand up for those who couldn't defend themselves. His passion for justice had been kindled during his unpaid internship at the Released Political Prisoners Trust, an experience that had exposed him to the harsh realities faced by political prisoners and the injustices that plagued Kenya's legal and political systems. This early experience solidified Kimani's commitment to human rights, transforming him into a determined advocate for the marginalized. Josephat's case, with its layers of corruption, abuse, and systemic failure, was exactly the kind of challenge that fueled Kimani's passion. For him, it was not just another legal battle, it was a fight against the very injustices he had dedicated his life to combating. With Josephat now under his wing, Willie Kimani vowed to pursue justice with every resource and skill at his disposal. He understood the gravity of the situation. Josephat's life had been upended by a corrupt system, and justice was slipping further away with each passing day. But Kimani was resolute. He assured Josephat that they would fight together, that they would navigate the legal maze and confront those responsible for his suffering. In Willie Kimani, Josephat found not just a lawyer, but a champion for his cause, someone who would not rest until justice was served. The road ahead would be difficult, but with Kimani's expertise, determination, and unwavering support, there was newfound hope that the truth would prevail and that Josephat's ordeal would finally come to an end. Unbeknownst to Willie Kimani and Josephat, the very man they were pursuing, Frederick, was not sitting idly by. Determined to protect himself and silence Josephat once and for all, Frederick enlisted the help of a police informer, Peter Ngugi. Ngugi was no stranger to the darker side of law enforcement. He had been involved in various covert operations and knew how to operate under the radar. Frederick's plan was as sinister as it was calculated. He tasked Ngugi with trailing Josephat on June 23, 2016, the day their case was scheduled to be heard in court. This was a critical moment in Josephat's fight for justice, and Frederick was determined to prevent it from reaching its conclusion. By having Ngugi follow Josephat, Frederick aimed to keep close tabs on him, ready to intervene and prevent any further progress in the case, possibly even through violent means. As Josephat prepared for what he hoped would be a turning point in his pursuit of justice, he was completely unaware of the danger lurking in the shadows. The legal battle he was fighting had now extended beyond the courtroom, with forces conspiring against him in secret. The presence of Peter Ngugi in this unfolding drama added another layer of peril to an already dangerous situation, turning the quest for justice into a deadly game of cat and mouse. The stakes had never been higher. While Josephat placed his trust in the legal system and in Willie Kimani's expertise, the looming threat posed by Frederick and his accomplice Ngugi cast a dark shadow over his hopes. Willie Kimani approached Josephat's case with the precision and dedication of a seasoned human rights lawyer. Drawing on his extensive experience, he meticulously built the case, gathering every piece of evidence needed for a landslide victory. He knew that this case was not just about clearing Josephat's name. It was about exposing the corruption and abuse of power that had been allowed to fester within the police force. Kimani's previous work had steeled him for the risks involved in cases like this. He had seen firsthand how the powerful could turn the legal system against the very people it was meant to protect. His experience with high-profile cases, like that of the murdered Mungiki spokesman Njuguna, had taught him the importance of thorough preparation and unyielding resolve. He understood the stakes and the dangers, but that only made him more determined. In preparation for the court date, Kimani left no stone unturned. He collected witness testimonies, medical records, and documented the series of events that led to Josephat's repeated harassment and false charges. Kimani knew that every detail mattered, and he was determined to build an airtight case that would hold up under the most intense scrutiny. But Kimani also understood the risks that came with challenging someone like Frederick. The case was fraught with danger, not just for Josephat, but for anyone involved in bringing the truth to light. Kimani was fully aware that going after a corrupt police officer with a reputation for violence was risky, but he was resolute in his mission. His work was more than just a job. It was a calling to protect the vulnerable and seek justice, no matter the cost. As the court date approached, Kimani was prepared for whatever lay ahead. He knew that victory in the courtroom would be hard-won, but with the evidence in hand and his legal expertise, he was ready to face the challenge. The battle was not just for Josephat's freedom, but for the very principles of justice and accountability that Kimani had spent his career defending. For Willie Kimani, his work as a human rights lawyer was more than just a profession. It was a sacred duty. He believed deeply in the adage that service to man is service to God, and this conviction drove him to give his all, even in the face of tremendous risk. His dedication was unwavering, rooted in a profound sense of responsibility to defend the oppressed and seek justice for those who had been wronged. However, this commitment did not come without personal sacrifice. At home, his wife often shared her fears about the dangers inherent in his line of work. She understood the kind of people Willie was up against, powerful individuals who would stop at nothing to protect their interests. Her worries were not unfounded. She knew that his work put him in harm's way, and the thought of losing him was a constant source of anxiety. But to Willie, fear was nothing but an illusion, a barrier that could be overcome with courage and conviction. He had faced threats before and had come to see fear as a test of his resolve rather than something to be avoided. His belief in the righteousness of his cause gave him the strength to push past the fear and focus on the task at hand. To him, standing up for justice was worth any risk, and he was determined not to let fear dictate his actions. Kimani's fearlessness was not born out of recklessness, but rather from a deep sense of purpose. He knew the risks, but he also knew that the work he was doing was essential. For him, every case was an opportunity to make a difference in the lives of those who had been silenced and marginalized. He believed that through his service, he was contributing to something far greater than himself, a pursuit of justice that transcended personal safety. As he continued to build Josephat Mwenda's case, Willie Kimani remained steadfast in his commitment. He was driven by the knowledge that he was doing the right thing, even if the path was fraught with danger. His wife's concerns weighed on him, but they only served to remind him of the importance of his work. Fear might have been an ever-present shadow, but for Willie Kimani, it was never enough to deter him from his mission. On the fateful morning of June 23, 2016, Willie Kimani woke up early, as he often did on days of crucial court battles. He dressed smartly, carefully selecting his attire, knowing that he needed to project both confidence and professionalism in the courtroom. His mind was focused on the task ahead. He was ready to stand before the Mavoko law courts and take on the corrupt forces that had tormented his client, Josephat Menda. Before leaving, Willie shared a tender moment with his wife and their young child. As he kissed his wife goodbye, there was a sense of routine in the gesture, a promise that he would return home later that day, victorious and proud. His wife, though still anxious about the dangers he faced, offered him a smile, hiding her unease behind a facade of support. She knew the importance of his work and had long come to accept the risks that accompanied it. But unbeknownst to Willie, this ordinary farewell would be their last. The kiss he gave his wife that morning was a final act of love, a silent goodbye that neither of them realized was happening. As he walked out the door, ready to confront the injustices that had plagued his client, he was unaware of the dark plans that had been set in motion against him. Determined and fearless, Willie Kimani headed to Mavoko law courts with the intent to kick some cop ass in court. He was fully prepared to challenge the corruption that had taken root in the police force, armed with evidence and a fierce sense of justice. But the forces aligned against him were just as determined, lurking in the shadows, ready to ensure that this would be a battle he would never return from. That morning, Willie Kimani unknowingly embarked on his final journey. The day that should have been another step toward justice would instead become a tragic end to a life dedicated to serving others. The night before June 23, 2016, was marked by a sinister meeting. Rogue cop Frederick had convened with his police informant, Peter Ngugi, at the local police canteen. Under the cover of darkness and casual conversation, they finalized a chilling plan, one that would ensure Josephat would never see justice served. Their discussion was detailed and methodical. They knew that Josephat's court appearance the next day was a crucial moment, one that could potentially expose the corruption and abuse within the police force. Frederick, determined to protect himself and silence Josephat, planned to eliminate him before he could testify and disrupt their machinations. As Willie Kimani woke up at 5 a.m., preparing for the day ahead with the hope of achieving a significant legal victory, his adversaries were already set in motion. Frederick and Ngugi were not just passively waiting. They had a plan that involved carefully orchestrated movements and coordination to ensure their objective was met. While Willie was focused on presenting a strong case and fighting for justice in the courtroom, the threat against him was being meticulously executed behind the scenes. Frederick's intent was clear: to prevent the truth from coming out and to protect his own interests at all costs. The stage was set for a tragic confrontation, with Willie Kimani unknowingly heading into a day that would turn from a quest for justice into a battle for his life. On the morning of June 23, 2016, Willie Kimani left his home and took a boda-boda ride to meet his trusted taxi driver, Patrick Muriuri. Muriuri, a reliable and familiar face, was there to transport Willie, along with their client, Josephat, to the Mavoko law courts. The journey was filled with a sense of purpose and anticipation. Willie and Josephat, both eager and prepared, were ready to face the day's legal battles head-on. By 9 a.m., they had arrived at the courthouse well ahead of their scheduled appearance. The early arrival was strategic, allowing them time to review their case, finalize preparations, and mentally prepare for the proceedings. The courthouse, a symbol of justice and the venue where Willie planned to challenge the corruption and abuse perpetrated by Frederick, was bustling with the usual activity of a busy legal day. Willie and Josephat were hopeful, ready to make their case and seek the justice that had been so cruelly denied to them. Unbeknownst to them, the plan to thwart their quest for justice was already set in motion. As they prepared for what they hoped would be a turning point in their fight, the dark forces aligned against them were moving into place, preparing for a confrontation that would have dire consequences. As Willie Kimani and Josephat arrived at Mavoko law courts, they were unaware of the dark plan unfolding behind the scenes. Peter Ngugi, the police informant working for Frederick, had also arrived at the courthouse, but he was accompanied by a woman whose role was crucial in the scheme against them. Ngugi, already having received 2,000 Kenyan shillings from Frederick as part of his payment, was ready to execute his part of the plan. His task was to identify and track Josephat, ensuring that Frederick's plan to eliminate him could be carried out without interference. The woman with Ngugi was responsible for pinpointing Josephat's location. As Willie and Josephat went about their preparations, Ngugi and his accomplice surveyed the courthouse, blending into the background but keeping a close watch. Ngugi's role was to shadow Josephat discreetly, ensuring that any move he made was tracked and reported back to Frederick. The sinister plot was now in full swing, with the informant's presence and actions orchestrated to prevent Josephat's quest for justice from reaching its intended conclusion. The stage was set for a confrontation that would mark a tragic turn in the day's events, with Willie Kimani and Josephat unwittingly walking into a trap laid by those who sought to undermine the pursuit of justice. As court proceedings began, Peter Ngugi took up his position outside the courtroom. His task was to monitor Josephat while Willie Kimani, with his characteristic professionalism and dedication, represented his client inside. Ngugi's role was to ensure that Josephat's movements were tracked, paving the way for the malicious plans orchestrated by Frederick. Around 11 a.m., the court session was adjourned. Willie and Josephat exited the courtroom, their focus on the legal battle ahead and hopeful for a positive outcome. Ngugi, alert and ready, sprang into action as soon as they left the courtroom. Ngugi discreetly followed Josephat and Willie, maintaining a safe distance but ensuring that he stayed within range to track their movements. His objective was to gather precise information on their next steps, which he would relay to Frederick. The informant's presence was a crucial element in the plot to undermine Josephat's quest for justice. As Willie and Josephat made their way through the courthouse and its surroundings, Ngugi remained vigilant, observing their actions and reporting back to the individuals orchestrating the plot against them. The situation was growing increasingly tense, with the dark plan unfolding as Ngugi's tracking was setting the stage for the tragic events to come. After Willie Kimani and Josephat were forcibly taken and placed in Frederick's car, Peter Ngugi followed their hired taxi, which had been driven by Patrick Muriuri, their trusted driver. Ngugi, using the taxi to avoid suspicion, drove it to the police post, where Willie and Josephat were being held in a container. Ngugi's instructions were clear. Once the pair were securely locked away, he was to take the taxi and drive it to Meru, effectively abandoning it there to distance any link back to the events at the police post. However, there was a significant issue with this plan. The taxi was a well-known vehicle in Zimmerman, a locality where its distinctive features and frequent routes made it easily recognizable. Driving the taxi along familiar routes could attract attention and raise suspicion. The risk of being noticed and potentially identified as connected to the unfolding crisis was high. This added an extra layer of complexity to Ngugi's task, requiring him to navigate carefully to avoid drawing unwanted attention. Despite the challenge, Ngugi carried out his orders. He drove the taxi with a heightened sense of caution, trying to blend in and avoid areas where the vehicle's distinctive presence might cause alarm. His ultimate goal was to drop the taxi in Meru, as instructed, while ensuring that it wouldn't lead back to the police post or the criminal activities orchestrated by Frederick and his associates. Peter Ngugi, mindful of the risk posed by driving the well-known taxi through Zimmerman, decided to alter his course. Instead of heading directly to Meru, he drove to Limuru town. There, he abandoned the taxi, and the phones left inside it at Kwambira Forest, a secluded area that would help obscure any connections to the events unfolding at the police post. By around 3 p.m., the taxi was left in the forest, with the phones discarded alongside it. This move was intended to sever any electronic traces that might link back to Ngugi or Frederick, adding a layer of misdirection to their plan. Meanwhile, Willie Kimani, Josephat and their driver, Patrick Muriuri, were confined in a container back at the police post. The situation inside the container was dire. The confined space and lack of proper ventilation were unsettling, heightening the distress of the individuals trapped inside. The plan to eliminate Josephat and thwart the pursuit of justice was reaching its critical phase. As Ngugi carried out his instructions and made efforts to cover their tracks, Willie, Josephat, and Patrick faced a harrowing and uncertain fate within the confines of the container, unaware of the full extent of the plot against them. Inside the container at the police post, Willie Kimani, ever the quick thinker even in dire circumstances, sought a way to reach out for help. With the oppressive heat and the growing sense of urgency, Willie took a tissue paper and scribbled a desperate message on it. The note was a call for help, detailing their perilous situation and the need for immediate intervention. He then waited for a moment of opportunity. When a passing boda rider came into view, Willie seized his chance. With the container's broken pipeline providing a small opening, he threw the note out to the rider, hoping it would catch his attention. The rider, likely unaware of the gravity of the situation at first glance, was handed the message. Willie's intention was clear. He wanted the boda rider to deliver the message to Josephat's wife, Rebecca Wanja, or to anyone who could help them. The note was a desperate attempt to alert someone to their plight and seek assistance before it was too late. This act of bravery and resourcefulness was Willie's final effort to ensure that their situation would not go unnoticed and that someone would come to their rescue. The message, now in the hands of an unsuspecting passerby, carried with it the hope of a crucial intervention. Rebecca Wanja, Josephat's wife, had initially ignored the desperate call for help. The message came from an unknown number, and like many Kenyans wary of unsolicited communications, she did not pick up. It was only when the call persisted that she finally answered. But by then, it was already too late. Unbeknownst to Rebecca, the situation had escalated drastically. Willie Kimani, Josephat Menda, and their driver, Patrick Muriuri, were no longer in the container. They had been transferred to a boot of a car, handcuffed, and were now en route to a grim fate. The vehicle carrying them was headed along the Nairobi-Mombasa road, a route that would take them far from the safety of Mavoko and closer to their ultimate destination. Despite Willie's valiant attempt to send a message for help, the delay in communication meant that the trio's fate was sealed as they were driven to their deathbeds. The tragic culmination of events was a stark reminder of the dangers faced by those who seek justice and the lengths to which corrupt individuals would go to silence them. Upon arrival at their grim destination, Willie Kimani, Josephat Menda, and Patrick Muriuri were subjected to an excruciating ordeal. For 3 harrowing hours, they were confined and forced to listen as Frederick and another officer, Steve Sheburet, debated the method of their execution. Imagine the sheer terror and psychological torment of being in that situation, seated in a confined space while your captors argue over how to end your life. The conversation between Frederick and Steve was not just about their fate, but also a cold, clinical discussion on the most efficient way to carry out the murder. The trio's fear and anxiety must have been overwhelming, knowing that their captors were not only planning their deaths but were doing so with a disturbing detachment. The discussion of their execution was a grim display of the power and corruption that had led to this moment, adding a layer of psychological horror to their physical captivity. This period of torment, marked by the chilling debate on their fate, was a cruel reminder of the lengths to which those in power would go to suppress and eliminate those who stood against them. After hours of harrowing discussion about their fate, Frederick and Steve reached a grim decision. The method of execution was chosen, and the process to carry out the plan began. Patrick Muriuri, who had been their driver and an unwitting participant in the nightmarish scheme, was forced to escort Willie Kimani, Josephat Menda, and himself one by one to the execution site. Each person was taken separately to face their killers. Frederick and Steve, with chilling efficiency and cold detachment, carried out their orders. They first stuffed each victim into a polythene bag, a final, suffocating measure before the act of strangulation. The brutality of the execution was swift and methodical, carried out with a stark, ruthless precision. In that dark and final moment, Willie, Josephat, and Patrick met their tragic end. Their bodies were then packed into sacks, a grim preparation for disposal. This was the horrifying culmination of a corrupt scheme designed to silence those who sought justice and expose the abuses of power. After the brutal execution, Frederick and Steve transported the lifeless bodies of Willie Kimani, Josephat Menda, and Patrick Muriuri in their vehicle. Their destination was a remote area where they could dispose of the bodies without immediate detection. They chose Aldonio Sabuk River, a location with a personal connection to Steve. He had previously worked there as an officer, which made the area a fitting choice for their grim task. The river provided a secluded spot, ideal for hiding the bodies and minimizing the chances of discovery. Steve guided Frederick to the exact location along the riverbank where the bodies were to be discarded. The bodies were unceremoniously dumped at the site, a chilling end to the victims' fight for justice. The location, chosen for its familiarity and isolation, served as the final resting place for those who had dared to challenge the corruption and abuse of power that led to their tragic fate. After the heinous act of disposing of the bodies, Frederick and Steve returned to Mlolongo police station. There, they proceeded as if nothing had happened, eating supper and even holding a party to celebrate their perceived victory. The grotesque nature of their actions did not seem to weigh heavily on them. Instead, they carried on with a disturbing sense of normalcy and even celebration. However, their sense of security was misplaced. The fact that they had targeted Willie Kimani, a respected human rights lawyer, meant that their actions would not go unnoticed or unchallenged. The legal community, outraged by the murder of one of their own, mobilized quickly. Lawyers across Kenya demonstrated in solidarity, demanding justice for Willie, Josephat, and Patrick. The widespread demonstrations and protests underscored the gravity of the situation and the public's demand for accountability. The legal profession's response was a powerful statement against the corruption and abuse of power that had led to the tragic events. The rogue cops' attempt to escape justice was met with a vigorous and unified outcry, ensuring that their actions would not be easily forgotten or forgiven. The outrage and widespread demonstrations by the legal community and the public eventually led to significant consequences for Frederick, Steve Cheburet, and their associates. The relentless pursuit of justice by the Kenyan legal community and human rights organizations ensured that the perpetrators faced the legal repercussions they deserved. Frederick, identified as the mastermind behind the gruesome murder, was ultimately sentenced to death. His role in orchestrating the execution of Willie Kimani, Josephat Menda, and Patrick Muriuri was met with the harshest penalty, reflecting the severity of his crimes and the profound impact of his actions on the victims and their families. Steve and the other rogue officers involved in the case were sentenced to at least 20 years in prison. Their convictions were a direct result of the legal community's efforts and the public's demand for accountability. The case became a landmark in Kenya's fight against corruption and police brutality, serving as a stark reminder of the consequences faced by those who abuse their positions of power. The convictions and sentences brought a measure of justice to the victims and their families, highlighting the resilience and determination of those who stood against corruption and sought to hold the guilty parties accountable. The tragic story of Willie Kimani, Josephat Menda, and Patrick Muriuri serves as a powerful testament to the fight for justice and the pervasive issue of corruption within institutions meant to protect. Their harrowing ordeal, culminating in their brutal murders orchestrated by rogue officers, highlighted the extreme consequences of unchecked abuse of power. The legal community's unwavering resolve and public outrage catalyzed a rigorous pursuit of justice, culminating in the arrest and conviction of those responsible. Frederick, the mastermind behind the atrocity, was sentenced to death, while Steve Cheburet and his accomplices received lengthy prison sentences. These outcomes were not only a measure of justice for the victims, but also a beacon of hope for systemic change within Kenya's law enforcement. Their story underscores the critical importance of vigilance, integrity, and the relentless pursuit of justice. It serves as a poignant reminder of the courage and sacrifices made by those who stand against corruption, ensuring that their legacy continues to inspire and drive efforts toward a fair and accountable justice system. Through their tragic loss, they have ignited a broader movement for reform, emphasizing that even in the face of profound adversity, the quest for justice remains paramount.